CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliette Mann. Our top stories. In the cold and the dark, large parts of Ukraine are without power in freezing temperatures after more Russian strikes on energy infrastructure.
I share your suffering. President Putin offers sympathy to the mothers of soldiers fighting in Ukraine, but says he has no regrets over launching military action.
Industrial action sweeps across the UK. Nurses are the latest to call strikes in the run-up to Christmas, the biggest in their history.
Is it Black Friday or Bleak Friday? We find out if the cost of living crisis is casting a shadow over the traditional spend-a-thon.
Qatar score their first ever World Cup goal, but the hosts are on the verge of being knocked out after being defeated by Senegal.
Much of Ukraine remains without power or heat after the most devastating Russian airstrikes on its energy grid so far.
Residents in the capital, Kyiv, have been warned to prepare for further attacks and to stock up on water, food and warm clothing. The UN Human Rights Chief says since last month, Russian strikes on critical infrastructure have killed at least 77 civilians and are plunging millions more into extreme hardship.
NATO's chief has urged allied countries to keep providing air defence systems and other weapons to Ukraine ahead of next week's meeting in Romania. Well, in a moment we'll talk to our Moscow correspondent Stuart Smith, but first of all, Shamim Chowdhury is in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, for us. So Shamim, power is still out in many parts. What more can you tell us?
That's right, 50% of Kyiv is without power, according to Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of the region, and that is reflected across the country. 30% of people do have heat now, but there has been no indication that that number is going to rise any time soon. Now, we are being told that we're going to go back to scheduled power cuts, 3 hours on, 3 hours off. That is going to be indefinite. But what I can also tell you is that the freezing temperatures have not halted the fighting, it seems. We're being told by Kherson's regional administration that 10 people were killed today and another 56 injured by Russian shelling from the left side of the Dnipro River, which is where you may recall they redeployed themselves after leaving Kherson city a couple of weeks ago. The Kherson Regional Administration also tells us that there have been at least 49 rounds of shelling by the Russians in the past 24 hours. Slightly further up north in Nikopol, which is in Dnipro region, there has been heavy fighting, as has there been in Bakhmut, which is still under Ukrainian control, but has seen heavy shelling from the Russians pretty much since the conflict began. All of this in very, very cold temperatures. It's below freezing at the moment. The only saving grace on this is Volodymyr Zelensky's pledge to have about 400 or so what he describes as invincible locations. They're basically areas, buildings, schools and other buildings that have been given assurance, given guarantee that they will remain with electricity, used by generators for an indefinite period. People can go there, have tea, charge up their phones. They're even given food, children are given toys, and they can stay there for as long as they like. That's really the only saving grace that people in this country are facing right now. Just one thing I want to add, there has been a visit by the UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, and he has pledged a whole host of aid to Ukraine as part of the restructuring effort. That includes 24 ambulances, 11 police cars and 6 armoured vehicles. In addition, he has pledged $3 million, which we believe will go towards the restructuring program. Some of it will go towards helping victims who have been sexually abused during this conflict. It seems like it is a step in the right direction in helping the country back again. Whether it is enough, well, who can say, given the devastation that the people here have faced.
Shamim, thank you very much. Our correspondent Shamim Chowdhury in Kyiv.
President Vladimir Putin has been meeting the mothers of Russian soldiers fighting in Ukraine. Hundreds of thousands of Russian forces have been sent to fight, including more than 300,000 reservists who were called up in a partial mobilisation in September. Our correspondent Stuart Smith's in Moscow. Stuart, what did President Putin have to say to this group of mothers who he was visiting?
Well, it's a rare move for the president, who tends to avoid publicly meeting with those directly involved with the so-called special military operation. In 9 months, it's only happened twice before, where he once visited soldiers at a hospital in Moscow and also attended a training camp for new conscripts, also just outside Moscow. But he said ahead of Mother's Day, which is on Saturday here in Russia, he wanted to talk to those whose sons are fighting in Ukraine.
For those of you who are here and who have lost their sons, of course, this is connected with thoughts about this tragedy. I want to say that it's impossible for me to come out with some formal stock phrases expressing my condolences, but I want you to know that I personally, the entire leadership of the country, we share your pain. We understand that nothing can replace the loss of a son, a child, especially for a mother. And of course we will be doing everything so that you don't feel forgotten.
Now, the comments of the president to the mothers later on, and potentially his responses, weren't broadcast, but there have been complaints from other mothers and women's organisations around Russia that have so far gone unaddressed from the Ministry of Defence and from the president. One organisation, the Council of Wives and Mothers, posted a message on its Telegram channel earlier in the week saying that they wished the president would meet with them. They've been lobbying and campaigning for quite some time for information on the fates of their children who have been sent to fight, conscripts as well as those as part of the military, the regular forces. And they're also calling on the Ministry of Defence to be allowed to ask questions, and also asking the Ministry of Defence for more transparency. The problem for these groups, they say, is that they believe they are not allowed to ask questions about what's going on because of the censorship rules in Russia at the moment. They're demanding that the MOD provides more transparency, and also the head of Russia's Council of Wives and Mothers says they wish the president would come to talk to them, not, quote, the hand-picked women and mothers in the Kremlin's pocket.
Stuart Smith in Moscow, thank you.
With the war in Ukraine pushing up energy prices, many across Europe are struggling to pay their bills. Germany has responded with a plan to introduce a cap on the cost of gas and electricity for households and businesses. The move, which will cost Berlin just under $56 billion, will come into effect from next March, although subsidies will also be paid for January and February.
More help's available for December, but as our correspondent Peter Oliver reports, some consumers are already facing price rises.
It's the latter many people in Germany have feared.
The monthly bills you must pay are 100% as expensive as last year, and you can no longer support that, so you can't pay for that anymore. And next year, will it be even more expensive?
Mandy Steuer's €121, around $126 per month, power bill has more than doubled to a new yearly rate of just over $3,060 per year. Financial aid from the government in Berlin is incoming over the coming months, but she is worried that short-term solutions are being sought to long-term problems.
In no case is it enough to cap the prices for a couple of months. Something has to be decided forever. I'm thinking of the poor pensioners. How are they supposed to pay double the cost? It's not just the electricity costs, the gas costs, the maintenance costs. It's almost impossible to afford a car anymore.
Germany, Europe's economic powerhouse, has been struck by the scramble to decouple from Russian energy because of the conflict in Ukraine. New gas sources have been hurriedly cast about for, and this week a storage and regasification ship for liquefied natural gas arrived in Mukran Harbour. This is one of 4 floating units. Last Sunday it was announced that the deal to lease them had cost more than double the planned amount, coming in at just under $7 billion. Under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Germany has put forward a robust financial aid plan totalling nearly $200 billion. He is confident that the country has the resources to get through this winter.
Germany's energy security for this winter is probably guaranteed. It is guaranteed because the German government took a courageous turn in direction and because households and companies across the country save energy.
For those dealing with the financial knock-on effect of Germany's energy policy, it's set to impact the upcoming Christmas period.
There are no gifts. Something cute, but no big gifts. We used to give big presents because I only have one daughter, but she lives far away. Because I have to pay whether I want to or not. We have to save on gas and living expenses.
Mandy falls into a camp with millions of other Germans where the question of what to do about these soaring bills is one they just haven't got an answer for.
Well, I'm afraid of the mailbox. I'm afraid it will increase even further. We don't know yet how things will continue. I may have to get a second job. Then that comes with additional costs for petrol. So it won't do much either. I'm all at a loss. So are many in the neighbourhood here.
For many, the uncertainty is causing so much anxiety about the future. Peter Oliver, CGTN, Fehlau, Brandenburg, Germany.
British nurses are to stage the biggest strike action in their history after the government refused a 19% pay rise.
Emergency care will continue on those dates, but routine and scheduled treatment will be affected. They're the latest group to call strike action as the cost of living soars, joining a growing list that includes train drivers, teachers, university staff and postal workers. Well, our correspondent Guy Henderson is here with us. So nurses asking for a 19% pay rise, and that does sound like quite a lot.
It does, but the RCN will tell you that their 300,000 or so members deserve that big pay rise. And I'm going to put a whole load of statistics at you now, if I may, to try and explain their rationale. An analysis of official figures shows that public sector wages have gone down in the UK in general, in real terms, 4.3% since the financial crisis in 2008. A recent study by the London School of Economics shows that experienced nurses have seen their pay drop in real terms 20% over the last decade. So they've been pretty badly hit when you're looking at the public sector overall in terms of pay. More official statistics. Nurses' pay this year has gone up by about 4%, maybe a little bit more. So that is something to sort of begin to claw some of that back. But of course, we're now in a period of huge inflation. So essentially, they are still taking a pay cut. What's more is that health workers particularly are facing a huge amount of pressure in the workplace at the moment because they've been through the pandemic. If you look at wait times now, well, in 2019 there was 1,305 people waiting more than a year for treatment. That has now gone up to 401,537. Those are stats from the British Medical Association. That's a 308% increase, a massive increase, and lots of workers are leaving. 25,000 people, nurses, have left the health service this year, 47,000 vacancies. So you've got fewer people, they're doing more work, and they're getting paid less for it. It's a pretty desperate situation.
Chuck Sivajuna will join the UK's first ever nurses' strike in the Royal College of Nursing's 106-year history. After a decade of decline in real wages and now soaring inflation, Ifajuna says something has to give.
I've had to cut down on a lot of things with the kids, which I can't afford to provide for them because of the high cost of living. So it's really, really tough for everyone, not just myself, my colleagues out there. You've got few nurses leaving as well to go and work in supermarkets because they will be paid better.
Health workers were heralded as heroes through the pandemic, but record patient backlogs and growing staff shortages have left many complaining that such poor conditions are unsustainable and could cost lives.
So you've just got pattern of work, which is very challenging, and those who are trying to do it are not feeling valued. So I think that sort of comes that's sort of the heart of why it sort of reached this situation, I guess.
The nursing strike's only scratching the surface of Britain's growing labour woes. 40,000 rail workers are back off work again this week, and promising more industrial action through December and into next year.
We have not had a strike for 7 weeks, and nothing has happened. So anyone that's been involved in industrial relations knows that there's got to be leverage and pressure at the table from both sides, and that will create the compromises and the resolutions that we're all looking for.
University staff, teachers and Royal Mail personnel have all been staging walkouts in the last few days as well. 100,000 civil servants have voted to do so in December. The British government is sticking to below-inflation wage offers for public workers, instead promising to bring the cost of living down. Extra money for the NHS and teachers announced by the Chancellor earlier this month came amid a sweeping round of tax rises and fears of broader public sector cuts.
But, Mr. Speaker, credibility cannot be taken for granted. And yesterday's inflation figures show we must continue a relentless fight to bring it down, including a rock-solid commitment to rebuild our public finances.
That, argue ministers, is the best way to ease the burden over time. But with Britain's economic outlook amongst the weakest in the developed world at the moment, many workers say they cannot wait that long.
Guy, are there any signs that the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is going to take a different approach to his predecessors when it comes to labour laws, regulations?
Well, I mean, his Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, used to be the Health Minister, so he has expressed some sympathy with the plight of health workers. He did put forward those extra funds for the NHS in his autumn statement, and we've heard specifically rail union bosses talking this week about how they sense a slightly more cordial atmosphere in the negotiations. But ultimately, this is a government that believes that the best way to get Britain out of its fix is to start growing the economy, and that necessary pain needs to be inflicted now to set up the UK and make everyone better off in the long term. They're worried about the precedent that might be set for giving in more to perhaps critical workers like those in the NHS, and that might then, lead to set a precedent, start raising wages across the board, which might be an inflationary factor in itself and prolong the pain. Just finally, we heard from Prime Minister Sunak just a few moments ago, specifically talking about the nurses' demands, saying he saw them as obviously unaffordable, so not much sign of him giving way there.
Guy, thanks very much. Our correspondent, Guy Henderson.
Former British Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and Liz Truss are adding their voices to a number of Conservative MPs calling for an end to a ban on new wind farms in England. Around 20 Conservative members of Parliament are calling for the ban, which has been in place since 2014, to be lifted. The move is putting pressure on newly appointed Sunak's government to revisit that policy.
Jaguar Land Rover says it will cut its UK production due to an ongoing shortage of semiconductors. Output will be reduced at 2 plants until at least next spring. It's expected to affect models including the Jaguar F-Pace and Land Rover Discovery Sport. New cars are heavily reliant on computer chips, but supplies from East Asia have been disrupted by the COVID pandemic.
Tesla is recalling more than 80,000 China-made and imported cars for software and seatbelt issues. The car maker recalled more than 67,000 Model S and Model X cars imported into China between 2013 and 2020. Tesla said it will upgrade the vehicle's software.
Meta is calling on the British government to protect it from a controversial bill seeking to amend hundreds of EU-derived laws by the end of next year. The Facebook and Instagram parent group wants to safeguard its social media platforms operating in the UK. The retained EU law bill is designed to strike off up to 4,000 European Union laws after Brexit.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. It's Black Friday, but will it be the shopping bonanza retailers are hoping for, or are cash-strapped consumers holding back?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? and unicorn companies. Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Welcome back. And do remember that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
EU trade ministers are meeting to discuss a controversial US law that offers support for American businesses, but which the EU says poses a risk to European companies. The US Inflation Reduction Act was signed into law in August. The $430 billion bill offers support across multiple sectors, including auto manufacturing. However, the EU says the legislation puts its industries at a major disadvantage. Let's talk to our correspondent, Jim Spellman, who's in Washington, D.C. Jim, why is this such a controversial issue for EU countries?
Well, really, there's two sets of concerns. First, the short term centering around fuel prices, with some EU officials accusing the U.S. of profiting off of the war in Ukraine. As countries in Europe have sought to be less reliant on Russian fuel, they've turned to U.S. suppliers. But a supplier in the EU could pay up to 4 times as much for liquefied natural gas the same company in the United States would pay. Now, the U.S. responds to that by saying prices are dictated by the markets, and that differential in price is largely due to middlemen as opposed to U.S. companies somehow gouging the European companies. But the longer-term concerns here are around the Inflation Reduction Act, a massive bill that passed over the summer here in the United States. It includes $369 billion in green subsidies. That's things like tax breaks for American consumers buying electric vehicles, but only if they're made in North America. European officials concerned that that could shift European investment away from European companies and into North America, threatening to destroy some EU industries, especially those that are centering around emerging green technologies. One German official calls it, quote, a crisis of trust between allies. Back to you.
A crisis of trust, but maybe that's why there's this US-EU task force that's been set up to deal with it. But are they making any progress?
Yeah, so last month, this US-EU task force on the Inflation Reduction Act was formed. Nothing concrete has come out of that so far. A few days after that announcement was made in late October, Catherine Tai, the U.S. trade representative, traveled to Prague to meet with European trade officials. But the statement that came out from the American side said she was only there, quote, promoting a deeper understanding of the IRA in Europe and not to commit to any changes in those policies. Germany and France calling for the U.S. to adopt policies that show more solidarity with Europe, while contemplating a shift in European industrial policy that some analysts say could lead to essentially a subsidy war. Listen.
We are envisaging measures to strengthen European industry in the case we cannot find a compromise at the level of the EU Commission and the US administration. You know, we are, both of us, responsible for our economies, the German economy for Robert, the French economy for myself. And of course, our responsibility is to defend and to develop our own economy by all means.
by all means, some strong language there. A couple things to keep in mind. The IRA was a big political win for President Biden and the Democrats, arguably helping them hold on to control of the U.S. Senate in the midterm elections. But the midterms have passed, so Washington may have a little more wiggle room now when dealing with Europe over some of these policies. Also keep in mind that both sides acknowledge that a full-blown U.S.-EU trade war would not benefit either side. One thing on top of mind for policymakers here in Washington is that if U.S.-EU cooperation is seen to be faltering, Russia could take advantage of that to create division over policy in Ukraine. Back to you.
Jim Spellman in Washington, thank you very much.
Elon Musk says Twitter will provide a general amnesty to nearly all banned accounts from next week. It's caused alarm among activists and online safety experts who say the move could see super spreaders of hate, abuse and harassment return to the social media platform. Well, let's talk to our correspondent John Tarrant in New York. So, John, Twitter offering an amnesty for banned accounts.
I know, Robin and Juliet, every day, every single day, this man makes a headline, and that's what makes him so interesting and why we keep reporting on what he's up to. Of course, you can never be sure with Elon Musk whether he really means it and whether it'll change in 24 hours from now. But anyway, for the time being, yeah, banned accounts coming back on Twitter. These are people who've been convicted by the old Twitter of harassment and false accounts and that sort of thing. Musk wants to have all these people back or give them a second chance, and he's doing it through Vox Populi, the voice of the people, or an opinion poll. Now, he did it last week with President Trump, as you know. 52% of those who took part in his Twitter survey said President Trump should be reinstated, and he has been. Now, he's not active at the moment, but I think he will be. I can't imagine that he won't be if he continues with his plan to run for the White House in 2024. Now, this one, 3 million people on Twitter took part, and they voted 72.4% in favor, 27.6% against the notion of restating these banned accounts. Now, one thing these people haven't done is they haven't broken the law, or at least we're told that. They haven't broken the law, or they haven't created any fake accounts. So at least they can't be accused directly of that. So that's the criteria that Musk is setting. He says these accounts are going to start coming back online as early as next week. Critics say, look, weren't you supposed to create some kind of content moderation council where you had a council of people, of the great and the good of society, to overlook all of this stuff? And we don't see that that's actually been created, and you're just going ahead and bringing these accounts back online, and they are concerned about increased harassment and increased misinformation on the site. Of course, we did yesterday the EU story about the Digital Services Act. Potentially this brings Twitter into direct confrontation with that act, which is considered the gold standard, which came into law in Brussels on the 16th of November. But you have to remember, guys, Twitter's a private company now. Elon Musk can do what he likes with it and suffer the consequences down the road. Of course, it could alienate advertisers even more than they appear to have been alienated already. And Musk, just a couple of weeks ago, said that there is now a big dent in the revenue stream of Twitter caused by advertisers either pulling their accounts altogether or by pausing them to see where all this is going. Robin and Juliet?
So, John, today is Black Friday. We're going to talk a bit more about this in just a moment, but
yes.
How is inflation affecting things where you are?
Well, you know, one thing I wanted to tell you was, it's extraordinary to me, but it's a year ago to this very day that I was standing outside Macy's talking to you, Juliet, and the news of the Omicron variant broke. That was 1 year ago today. If you'd have asked me, I would have said it was a million years ago, quite frankly, because so much has happened in between, but it was actually 1 year ago to this very day. So Black Friday comes around again for 2022. We don't know whether it's going to be a bleak Friday or not. I know that inflation, which is at a 40-year high, although it's coming down, is definitely going to determine the outcome of this Black Friday and the spending right up through and the other side of the Christmas holidays. We're getting conflicting reports, if I'm honest with you. Some people are talking about spending less, spending much more wisely, buying less, maybe only one present for each person in the family this year instead of 5 or 6. Now, the big stores, of course, are slashing their prices here, people like Walmart and Target, because they hired their own ships during the supply chain crisis, and they've now got too much stuff. So there you can pick up some pretty big bargains. But the mom and pop stores, of which they still proliferate in America, little individual businesses, they could charge a little bit less if they want to, but they've also got higher rent, higher wages in some cases, and higher electricity bills, so it's more difficult for them. Tomorrow is Small Business Saturday in America, so they will get a lift tomorrow. Monday, of course, is Cyber Monday, less important now than it used to be, but still you can pick up some huge bargains on that day. And now, like our Guy Henderson just now, I'm going to give you a whole list of numbers that won't mean very much, but hell, I'm going to do it anyway, because I can. Now, the retailers here in America think that 63% of them, of those surveyed, are expecting higher sales this year than last year. The retail people are looking for 114 million people to shop today, 2/3 of them in stores, 166 million over the weekend, 8 million more turning out than last year, and retail sales up by 6% to $950 billion. Now, I know that sounds a lot, but it doesn't take into account those people who are really suffering. I would have all eyes on Cyber Monday if I was you. One other quick point. Amazon workers around the world are striking today for more pay, so that's something that's new for Thanksgiving. And, of course, it has to be said, all of this, all of it, could actually be inflationary at a time when that's the last thing we need. Juliet and Robin?
John, thanks very much. Our correspondent John Terrett in New York.
That's the overview from the United States. But what about Black Friday in Europe? Because analysts say overall sales and profits from the shopping bonanza Black Friday will be lower than last year as consumers find their budgets squeezed. With rising prices and environmental awareness growing, one poll of 1,000 shoppers by Thought Clothing found that only 28% like Black Friday in its current form. And some retailers are turning that challenge into an opportunity by showcasing more sustainable shopping, like eBay UK, which is only promoting pre-owned and refurbished items this Black Friday. Well, let's get more on this with Kate Hardcastle, who's consumer expert at Insight with Passion. Great to see you, Kate. So is this going to be the big, busy day that retailers are hoping for, or is that cost of living crisis just going to dent potential sales?
Hi to you both. I would say there's a couple of things going on. Mainly, shoppers globally are really challenged by those rising costs on essential items, meaning quite simply that then the disposable income left for big spend periods as we're entering now, classed as peak in most of the retail environments, are going to be challenged. It might be that we do see the suggested up to 20% uplift on sales from Black Friday last year, but I think in the main those will be sales brought forward that would have happened later on or perhaps earlier on. We're seeing two main trends coming through which really indicate just how much pressure the shoppers are under and how they're looking very differently at this Black Friday. Firstly is, as your colleague mentioned, this rise of call it vintage, re-commerce, as I used to call it, second-hand goods, but definitely much more focus in terms of organisations presenting reconditioned or re-commerce goods. And just in case you think that might not be really a big part of the crowd, 2/5 of the UK public and 3/5 of the US public have cited that in the last 12 months they have bought vintage, second-hand or re-commerce goods, and that's subject to research from Emarsys. I think, therefore, we understand people looking for different types of bargains. And in addition to that, what's really interesting is how we're seeing some of these cost-saving hero products really come to the forefront of what people are looking for, particularly Europe-wide, where we are suffering significant fuel bills. So those would be items like air fryers, which can save turning on the oven, or indeed air heated racks, saving on tumble dryers, which can be quite fuel-hungry appliances.
So smart shopping, more sustainable shopping, but from that consumer's point of view, are these deals the real deal? Because some consumer groups say, you know what, those price cuts are better at different times of year.
Research has proven that most products can be bought at other times of year with more of a deal. And I don't think the consumer is finding that new news, to be honest. The reason Black Friday exists is because it is at a time we spend more. The huge department store, John Lewis Partners, make 2/3 of their profit in the 8 weeks up to Christmas. This is a big peak period for retail. So it's in retail's interest to present more deals, more excitement for shoppers this time of the year, and shoppers to hunt out a bargain when they are looking to enhance or take more in terms of spend. I think reality has hit. There are so many shopping comparison websites. In the main, yes, we must always be careful of fraudulent deals, fraudulent shopping, etc. But the consumer's quite savvy. They're using this period to get a better deal on something they were wanting to buy anyway.
I'm wondering about small retailers who are struggling too with the cost of living crisis, energy crisis. They're going to be under pressure, aren't they? With the bigger shops have bigger, well, they have more wiggle room, I suppose, when it comes to margin. Might we see a change in the shape of high streets and shopping precincts all across Europe?
I think we're in the biggest evolution period of retail, which makes my job very exciting, but we've got to go through pain to get the gain, and we're going to get quality offers in those high streets and centres across Europe and indeed globally, and less of the quantity. So we're going through a shaping period, and we know that the balance has got to be big business and small businesses. Those small businesses bring so much. They enhance communities. A lot of the money spent stays locally, hiring local people, using local produce. So it's in everyone's interest for them to not just survive, but to thrive. But you're quite right to point out how challenging it is. Speaking to small businesses I've supported throughout the high streets in the UK through our philanthropic give back, I've heard from thousands and thousands of people who just can't open the door 7 days a week anymore. The fuel or the costs of running the business, or even indeed the staffing in areas like hospitality, have been very challenging. What we've got to hope is, with the support of consumers, support of initiatives, and indeed perhaps government and local council authorities, we see some support in them being part of the picture moving forward, because I think it's so important for consumers.
Kate Hardcastle, always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time.
80% of products purchased on Black Friday end up as waste within a year, so says the UK campaign group Green Alliance. But surging commodity prices are helping to make recycling electronic waste more viable. Advances in technology and tougher regulation are also helping reduce the piles of hazardous e-waste that Europe has been exporting to the developing world. Our correspondent Darshan Dalal reports.
We live in a technology-obsessed world with a seemingly endless desire to upgrade our devices and throw out the old ones. This is the result: a growing mountain of e-waste that is putting the environment and our health at risk. These huge piles of waste products, mostly from the developed world, often end up in open landfills in Africa, where they are burned to separate out valuable metals. A process that releases toxins into the environment.
In some parts of Nigeria, a lot of people are now taking to waste picking or recycling. Recycling with bare fingers, bare hands, without any form of protective materials, without the knowledge of how toxic the elements they're handling is. So it's a total exposure to hazards.
Natural sources of copper, gold and cobalt are rapidly depleting. These are the precious metals that are widely used in electronics. And the double whammy of the COVID pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict are helping to push their prices to historic highs. So now the question being asked is, to what extent can metals be recycled from electronic scrap? Veolia is one of the world's biggest waste management companies. I visited their TV recycling unit in Bridgnorth in the West Midlands of England.
300,000 flat screens, so TV screens, computer screens every year on this facility. And what's happening is we take the screens, we dismantle them, and we recycle every bit: the metal, the plastics, and the circuit boards into the screens. And it's where you got lots of metals in it, like gold, etc. It's all on the PCB. But that will be extracted off-site, will be somewhere else.
Technological advances, coupled with those high commodity prices, are helping to reduce the amount of e-waste being exported from Europe. Veolia says it won't be long before around 2/3 of the material in old devices can be sustainably returned to the supply chain. Market giants like Apple and Samsung say they are throwing their support behind the circular economy by expanding the use of recycled materials in their products. But critics say these measures don't go far enough.
Those companies are jumping on the concept of circular economy without, or zero waste, without really understanding that. The producers are doing some steps to improve recyclability or to use recycled content. Yes, that's fine. But still, this is not comparable to the scale of what is put on the market.
Consumers show no sign of losing their appetite for new gadgets. So recyclers across the globe are scrambling to expand their facilities to treat these mountains of e-waste in the hope of keeping them from getting any higher. Darshan Dalal for CGTN Europe in Bridgnorth.
This week on the agenda here on CGTN, we look back at the COP27 climate summit in Sharm el-Sheikh. Was it a flop, or has it set the world on a path to save the planet? Some have called the agreement on loss and damage made there a historic breakthrough, but others, like Dr. Satyendra Prasad, Fiji's ambassador to the UN, say the lack of progress on keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees by the end of the decade is a huge missed opportunity.
Deeply disappointing. Look, why this really matters is for many countries, the 100 billion provides the co-financing for climate action. It is unjust, it is immoral as well, and it is wrong in all dimensions of that term for highly vulnerable countries to have to borrow at commercial rates or semi-commercial rates to recover from climate catastrophes that they did not cause. And this is the reality for so many countries. So many countries are putting aside and pulling back on their human development, are reallocating significant resources to recover and rehabilitate after each climate catastrophes. And many countries are living from climate catastrophe to climate catastrophe. And unless the funds have been put in place to allow them to stabilize their development, to preserve and their development gains, this unfairness of the climate crisis will continue. And this is just so wrong.
And you can see all of that discussion on the agenda with me this weekend here on CGTN.
You're watching Global Business Europe on CGTN. Still to come.
For the moment of truth, then, we'll give it a go. Find out how these dumplings are giving Ukrainians here in London a chance to connect with the war effort back home. Very good.
穿过的像丛林一样的历史，去找寻古人的精神世界。
它是我血脉当中固有的文化基因，就它刚好赶上这个时候了，它在复苏。
成为全国诊断速度最快的一个城市。你的密码是什么？
就是国家的发展还是要靠科技的。
很想看到整个自己国家的一些很特色的东西，这是一种情感需求，你知道吗？
也想往上再冲一冲，只是为了自己心中那份热爱。
加油！每一个小群体都不应该被放弃。
但是就是还有一点想去上学。
它是一项足以改变汽车整个发展历程的一项重大突破技术。
市场的东西是天路开发。
掌握了激光，我们就有无限可能。
人类的梦想和我们科学家的兴趣非常有机的结合在一起。
3、2、1，
女性也可以不一样。女性也可以站在更高更大的舞台上。
孩子看到希望了，我们家里也看到希望了，很激动。
觉着挣钱嘛。
我就是希望让古人的文化来纪念一下现代人，然后让历史再活一次。
向世界讲，我们共同的理念，我们是一家人，我们是一个共同体。
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and me, Juliet Mann. The headlines again. In the cold and the dark, large parts of Ukraine are without power in freezing temperatures after more Russian strikes on energy infrastructure.
Industrial action sweeps across the UK. Nurses are the latest to call strikes in the run-up to Christmas, the biggest in their history.
Black Friday or Bleak Friday? The cost of living crisis casts a shadow over the annual Spendathon.
EU lawmakers are in Brussels trying to reach a deal to resolve tensions among the bloc's members over migration. A dispute flared between Rome and Paris earlier this month after Italy turned away a charity ship with 230 migrants on board. The vessel docked in southern France after spending days off the island of Sicily. Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. So, Alex, what's the significance of this meeting?
Well, it's a very significant meeting, and as you'd imagine, a refugee crisis in the Mediterranean is, or the potential for one, is something that absolutely looms large and focuses minds here in Brussels and across the European Union. You'll remember back in 2015, the refugee crisis off the back of the war in Syria was a real problem for the European Union and caused a lot of very deep division in the Union member states, not being in agreement about who's going to shoulder the biggest burden of those refugees coming in. And this is a very similar situation. The Ocean Viking, which was an NGO-run ship in the Mediterranean. It rescued 230 migrants or refugees in the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya. The closest country to that in the European Union was Italy. Therefore, that means Italy would have been responsible for processing those migrants. And Italy said no, and this is obviously due to domestic politics in Italy and a new right-wing government drawing a very hard line on immigration. The Italian government and Rome saying, no, we've taken 90,000 this year, and we really don't want to be shouldering this much of the burden on our own. Why don't you send them to France? The French then pushing back, and we've been going back and forth for a few weeks between Rome and Paris, as you said. So the EU is in the middle, trying to mediate, trying to get their action plan passed, to focus on a variety of things, but notably on burden sharing, making sure that the relocation and the repatriation of those migrants and the acceptance of those migrants is shared equally across the bloc. And that's part of the reason why France was so frustrated. They say we have a system in place. If they arrive in Italy, they can come to France. But if you force us to take them in France, then we won't take the ones you have. So that is really the crux of the issue. And no resolution today. The European Commissioner in charge of migration saying, look, this is going to be an ongoing discussion. But it's certainly one that they are very keen to avoid the kind of crisis we saw in 2015.
And this meeting comes almost exactly a year after there was a mass drowning of migrants in the English Channel. How much is that, and events like that, likely to influence new EU policies on migration?
Yeah, that's definitely going to loom large, and it's going to be very front of mind in the minds of people negotiating today. One of the evolutions we've seen are these big NGO boats, these reasonably well-funded, much larger, much more seaworthy boats that are patrolling the Mediterranean, helping people off very unsafe, very small, very unseaworthy dinghies and rafts and small boats, very much putting their lives at risk. These NGOs stepping in to provide some level of safety. But the problem there is once they're on that ship, once they're on that safer NGO ship, and they're getting crammed in there because they're trying to save as many people as possible from the risks of the Mediterranean, well, where do they go? And that's been the big debate. Where do these ships go? Where do these ships land? So avoiding deaths in any refugee situation, any migration situation is obviously very much a priority, and that's why these NGOs are stepping in. The European nations are splitting the Mediterranean in their search and rescue efforts all the way from Malta to Spain in the west, so there's a very big response to that. But that kind of crisis, that kind of tragic loss of life will absolutely be front of mind for ministers in Brussels.
Alex Cadier in Brussels, thank you very much.
Russia's war on Ukraine has created millions of refugees. Many ended up in Britain, but some are keeping local traditions alive as a link to home. Our correspondent, Luigi Barkle, reports.
With their nimble handwork, Svetlana and Irina make this look easy. But making these dumplings is a lot harder than it looks.
It's difficult to get those edges right.
After fleeing the conflict in March, Irina spent a month in Poland before joining her sister, who lives in London. They recently started making and selling these delicacies from home to spread their culture and help raise awareness for aid donations.
One evening we said, well, why don't we just see how it goes, and maybe if there is demand, maybe we go on. And so far there was a demand, and people like it. We have returning clients, which is always nice to see.
This food, called pelmeni, is popular with Russians too, a sign of the historical ties that connect the two states, now firmly at war. Their father joined his daughters in July, forced to leave his home in Luhansk, where some of the fiercest fighting has taken place. Aged 71, he remembers Ukraine as a Soviet state and never imagined he'd have to leave.
Not an inch of Ukrainian territory should go to Russia. Whoever comes to us with weapons, it's a warning for them. We won't give up our territory. My brother lives in Russia and his children obviously view things very differently. But for us, we will not give up our land.
This is one family, one story showing the impact this war is having, now in its 10th month and with little sign of stopping. Many more Ukrainians have sought refuge here in the UK, with nearly 150,000 arriving so far this year under special visas that mean they can stay for up to 3 years.
Irina's daughter Maria now goes to school in London. She's slowly learning the language, but with her father back in Ukraine, there's much she misses.
She all time very want back at home. She wait, so she's saying, "Mom, one day we sit and fly back at home."
It's not clear if or when that day will come. For now, this family is building a new life in relative safety, but still so conscious of the war raging back home. Luigi Barkil, CGTN, London.
Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick take.
It will be 90 metres tall, lift 27 tonnes and will send astronauts to the moon. China is developing a new generation launch vehicle which could be ready by 2030. Sunglasses on, China has released a photo of the sun's surface. It's the very first image produced by its hard X-ray imager in space. After 150 years, a merchant vessel from the Qing dynasty has been hoisted out of the water near Shanghai. Winter has descended upon the banks of the Ganghe River in Inner Mongolia, and the views are breathtaking. The world's largest 16-megawatt offshore wind turbine has just rolled off the production line in Fujian. And you're never too old. His grandkids tell him it's too dangerous, but Li Mingxing from Chengdu City loves his skateboarding at the age of 84.
And you can see that and much more at europe.cgtn.com.
You're watching CGTN, still to come. Are the hosts Qatar about to become the first team to be knocked out of the World Cup? We're live in Doha.
This week on Razor, why diet, not exercise, is the key to weight loss. And how a clever algorithm and robotic arm are transforming how much can be recycled.
The amount of plastic that's being produced goes up every year, the cost of plastic goes up every year, and that's really building this marketplace where you need high quality automation to be able to deal with the load.
Welcome back. It's day 6 of play at the Qatar World Cup. The Netherlands are leading 1-0 against Ecuador. Cody Gakpo opened the scoring after just 6 minutes. The result of this match will have big implications for the hosts Qatar, who lost to Senegal earlier. If the Netherlands avoid defeat, then Qatar will be the first team to be knocked out of the World Cup.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Dan Williams, who is in Doha. So, Dan, the hosts have got their first goal, but they could still be going out.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, hugely disappointing for Qatar, the host, obviously after 12 years of build-up to this tournament, and looking now very likely that after 2 games they will be essentially out of this competition. They did, as you say, to have the crowd there today having a goal to celebrate, at least Mohamed Muntari, with the goal in the 3-1 defeat to Senegal that took place today, but it wasn't enough. The fans in the stadium well, they did give the home team a round of applause at the end of that end of the game. But after that 2-0 reverse to Ecuador, now this defeat against Senegal, real disappointment amongst the fans. What's going to be interesting is whether there will now be, like we saw in South Africa 2010, the host that crashed out then, whether there'll be the fans here will switch their allegiance to other teams in the region. But for now, definitely disappointment all here for the home fans.
So let's talk about the day's early match, and we had some very late drama in that game between Wales and Iran in Group B.
That's right, yeah, it looked like this game was going to go to a draw, but Wayne Hennessy, the Wales goalkeeper, got sent off late on. Iran making the most of that situation, scoring 2 late goals. An amazing effort from Iran, who are probably more seen as the underdogs going into this one, following their 6-2 defeat to England. And a fabulous effort for them. It's Iran now that now have hopes of reaching the knockout stage of a World Cup for the first time. Of course, the other game in Group B today, that's the later game, England versus USA. And England back, bolstered by Harry Kane coming back from that from an injury, looking likely as well that that England will go through if they can win that game. USA haven't beaten European opposition in a World Cup since 2002, but what it sets up is that it seems as though the last game of that group will be USA versus Iran, and there'll be a lot riding on that. Essentially, winner could go through to the next round.
So looking ahead to tomorrow for a moment, and we have Saudi Arabia looking for another big win after their sharp victory over Argentina.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was obviously a sensational result, one of the great World Cup results and surprises. And of course, the Saudi Arabian players celebrated long into the night. They had the following day off as well. And then, of course, the players now, though, very much focused on getting back to business. They take on Poland in the next game. And a little earlier, I caught up with the team to see how their preparations were going.
After causing one of the all-time World Cup upsets, it was a case of back to business for the Saudi Arabia players. Few gave Saudi Arabia much hope of winning their opening match against Lionel Messi's Argentina. But a scintillating second-half performance saw the Arab country claim a stunning 2-1 victory. Salah Al-Sari scoring their opener.
All of the odds was against us, and we believe in ourselves. We worked hard to get here. It wasn't easy, and I think we proved everyone that we are worthy to be here.
The shock win led to a snap national holiday being declared in Saudi Arabia. It has been celebrated as a statement win, a coming of age for the country on the world football stage.
Next up for Saudi Arabia is a match against Poland, and despite those first match heroics, the odds still favour Poland. Not that the Saudi Arabia players appear fazed by that.
That feeling, if we want to last, we have to qualify from this group. We did the first job, I think, very good. Still, we have 2 more jobs to do, and we have to make our country proud and our fans.
This is a team growing in confidence. The target now to reach the knockout phase of a World Cup for just the second time in the country's history. Dan Williams, CGTN, Sea Line Beach, Qatar.
And of course, the other game in Group C will see Argentina take on Mexico. You can hear behind me the Argentinian fans in full voice. They fully expect Lionel Messi to come back and make amends for, obviously, that disappointment in that opening game.
Dan Williams in Doha, thank you very much.
And that's it for Global Business. Thank you for watching.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again on Monday, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.